In October 1948, inside a prison in Lublin, Poland, a 34-year-old German woman was let out of her cell for the last time. She had written a letter to the President of Poland only weeks earlier. In it, she did not argue that she was innocent. She admitted her guilt. She asked instead to be allowed to live because she had a small son waiting for her somewhere in Germany, and she said she wanted the chance to make amends for what she had done. It was a plea built entirely on motherhood, and it came from a woman who had spent nearly 2 years standing on the ground at Majdanek, watching mothers and children walk toward the gas chambers and doing nothing to stop it. The president read the letter. He refused. Her name was Elsa Ehrich, and she was the only female guard from Majdanek ever sentenced to death by a Polish court. If you want more stories like this one, stories the history books mention in a single line and then move on from, subscribe to the channel. It costs nothing, and it keeps these records from disappearing. She was born on the 8th of March 1914 in Bad Dürkheim, a small village in what was then the Grand Duchy of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. Her family was evangelical. She was baptized at the St. Martin Church in the village, and the clerk who recorded her name in the church register wrote it down wrong. The registry entry read Elsa instead of Else. That misspelling followed her for the rest of her life, into her SS file, into her indictment, and onto the list of the condemned. There was nothing in her early years that pointed forward. She completed Volksschule, the basic German elementary schooling of the period, and left. As a teenager, she went to work in a slaughterhouse. It was unglamorous, physical labor, the sort of job that thousands of German working-class girls of her generation took because there was no alternative on offer. She was not educated for ideology. She was not raised in a party household that has been documented as fanatical. She was an ordinary young woman from an ordinary village doing ordinary work. Then, on the 15th of August 1940, she volunteered. That word matters. Ehrich was not conscripted into the camp system. She was not swept up in a general mobilization and assigned somewhere against her will. She put her name forward for service at Ravensbrück concentration camp as a member of the SS Gefolge, the female auxiliary attached to the SS. Germany had already been at war for almost a year. The camp system was expanding, and it needed women to supervise women. The pay was better than the slaughterhouse. The uniform carried status. Whatever her reasons were, she chose the work. Ravensbrück was the training ground for almost every woman who ended up in a supervisory role inside the camps. It was where the system taught them what was expected, and where it discovered which of them had the appetite for it. Ehrich had the appetite. By the summer of 1942, she had been promoted to SS Rapportführerin, a rank that put her in charge of roll calls, head counts, and the enforcement of discipline over an entire section of prisoners. Roll call was the point in the camp day where power was most visible and most arbitrary. A Rapportführerin could hold hundreds of starving women standing in freezing rain for hours over a miscount. Ehrich held that post for months. In October 1942, she was transferred east to Majdanek, on the outskirts of Lublin, in occupied Poland. Majdanek was not a labor camp with a killing function bolted on as an afterthought. It was a killing site. Across the roughly 34 months the main camp operated, more than 79,000 prisoners were murdered there, and around 59,000 of them were Polish Jews. Counting the wider network of subcamps, the total climbs to somewhere between 95,000 and 130,000 people. Prisoners died from gas, from bullets, from starvation, from typhus, from beatings, and from work that was designed to consume a human being within weeks. The camp sat close enough to Lublin that residents of the city could see the watchtowers from the road. There was no remote forest clearing hiding what happened there, no elaborate concealment. It operated in plain sight of an occupied population that could do nothing about it. Guards walked out of the gates in the evening and walked back in the morning. The ordinariness of the commute is part of the record. Ehrich rose inside that place. After a period at Majdanek, she was promoted to SS Oberaufseherin, the senior supervisor over the women's section of the camp. That title placed her at the top of the female guard hierarchy in one of the deadliest installations the SS ever built. Every Aufseherin working with the women prisoners answered to her. She set the tone. She distributed the assignments. She decided what would be tolerated and what would not. And she took an active part in the selections. Selection was the mechanism. Prisoners would be assembled, looked over, and sorted. One group returned to the barracks. The other group was sent to the gas chambers. Ehrich participated in all the major selections at Majdanek and in the executions that accompanied them. She is held responsible for the deaths of thousands of prisoners from the women's section, and the women's section held children. That last detail is the one that survivors kept returning to. She did not treat children as a category apart. There was no line she declined to cross when the prisoner in front of her was small. One survivor account has been preserved that captures her exactly, and it is worth sitting with, because it is not about mass murder at all. It is about a blanket. Sick prisoners were being loaded onto a cart, stripped down to their underwear, in the open air. Another prisoner threw a blanket over them to give them some cover. Ehrich pulled the blanket back off. She struck the woman with a whip, and she told her not to waste hospital property. That is not a story about ideology. It is not about racial theory or party doctrine or anything a defense lawyer could dress up as political conviction. It is a story about a woman who saw human beings freezing and calculated the value of the linen. The cruelty was administrative. That is what made it so hard to argue away in a courtroom 4 years later. She had a deputy at Majdanek. Her assistant was Hermine Braunsteiner, a name that would surface again decades later on the other side of the Atlantic, after Braunsteiner had built a quiet life in the United States as a housewife and was eventually stripped of her citizenship and deported back to Germany to face what she had done. Ehrich supervised her. That is the level Ehrich operated at. On the 3rd of November 1943, Majdanek became the site of the largest single-day, single-camp massacre of the Holocaust. Around 18,000 Jews were shot at the camp in one day. As part of the operation, the SS gave the name Erntefest, Harvest Festival. Across the wider operation, including 2 subcamps, the figure reaches roughly 43,000. Music was played over loudspeakers to cover the sound of the shooting. It took the entire working day. Ehrich was the senior female supervisor at Majdanek at that time. Her own record was interrupted at one point by the camp itself. In February 1943, she fell ill with typhoid, the same disease that killed prisoners in the thousands around her, though her illness came with a doctor and a recovery. By the 5th of April 1944, she had moved on and was serving as Oberaufseherin at the Krakow-Plaszow concentration camp. From June 1944 until April 1945, she was posted to Neuengamme, near Hamburg, as the German position collapsed and the camps in the east were overrun. The war ended and she went to ground in Hamburg. It did not work. In May 1945, she was arrested by British occupation authorities in the city, and she was handed to United States custody at PWE 29, the internment facility for war crime suspects at Dachau. There she shared a cell with Maria Mandl, the Oberaufseherin of Auschwitz-Birkenau, who would herself be tried in Poland and hanged. Two of the most senior women in the entire camp system, sitting in the same room, waiting to find out what the world intended to do with them. Poland requested her. She was transferred to Polish authority to answer for what had happened at Majdanek. The trial came in 1948, before the district court in Lublin, as part of the second round of Majdanek proceedings. Polish prosecutors were not building a case around abstractions. They built it on survivors. Women who had stood in her roll calls came into the courtroom and described what she had done: the beatings, the whippings, the selections, the treatment of children and of the sick. Across the full sequence of Majdanek trials, 95 former members of the camp staff were convicted. The testimony carried weight that no document could match. These were women who had been counted by her, sorted by her, and left standing in the cold by her, and they were now seated a few meters away, describing it aloud while she listened. Poland had liberated Majdanek in July 1944 and found the site largely intact, gas chambers and crematorium included, which meant the physical evidence had never been destroyed. The prosecution had both the place and the people. Ehrich was found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. On the 10th of June 1948, the court condemned her to death by hanging. Of every woman who served as a guard at Majdanek, she was the only one to receive a death sentence in these proceedings. Then came the letter. After the verdict was announced, Ehrich petitioned Bolesław Bierut, the president of Poland, for clemency. Her argument was not a denial. She did not claim mistaken identity or say she had been elsewhere. She wrote that she had a small son and that she wanted to atone for her guilt. She was asking for the chance to be a mother and to become a better person. From a courtroom in a country where she had helped preside over the deaths of tens of thousands of people, in a camp where mothers were separated from their children on her watch, and marched to the gas chambers with her standing in the line of command. Bierut rejected the request. On the 26th of October 1948, Elsa Ehrich was hanged in Lublin prison. She was 34 years old. She had volunteered for camp service 8 years and 2 months earlier, of her own free will. What lingers about her case is not the scale, though the scale is beyond comprehension. It is the ordinariness underneath it. A village girl from Mecklenburg, a church register with her name written down wrong, a slaughterhouse job, and then a signature on a form in August 1940. Everything that followed came from that signature. She was not born into the machinery. She walked into it, and once inside, she climbed. The historian Elisa Mailänder examined the women of Majdanek in detail and found that the violence was not the product of some separate breed of person. It was learned on the job, rewarded by the institution, and normalized by everyone standing next to them. Ehrich fits that pattern precisely. She started with head counts. She ended with selections. Nobody ever told her to stop, and the system kept promoting her for not stopping. Her clemency plea is the final proof of it. She understood, at the end, exactly what the value of a child is, and exactly what it means for a mother to lose one. She understood it well enough to use it as her last argument for her own life. That understanding had been available to her every single day at Majdanek. She had simply never applied it to anyone standing on the other side of the wire. The court in Lublin did apply it. That is the whole difference. 95 members of the Majdanek staff were convicted. Countless others were never identified, never charged, and never questioned by anyone. Hermine Braunsteiner spent decades as a housewife in Queens, New York, before anybody came looking. The men and women who ran that camp did not vanish into some special category of monster after 1945. Most of them went back to being ordinary, and ordinary is where they had come from in the first place. Elsa Ehrich did not get that. She got a courtroom, a verdict, a rejected letter, and a rope in a Lublin prison on an October morning in 1948. The people she selected got nothing. If this is the kind of history you want on your feed, the cases that never made the front page, and the names that almost slipped through, subscribe. Every name recorded here is one that somebody once tried to forget.